Hey everyone, I wanted to make a quick tutorial on how to make better train couplers for physics-based trains using configurable joints. This is sort of a follow-up to a previous video I made where I showed you how to get train-like physics behavior constrained to a spline. However, the way I approached joining the cars together was pretty atrocious and caused several bugs and lag, so I thought I'd make a video with improved coupling. I won't be going over any code here, just configuring joints in the inspector to set up the coupling between carts, since that's all we'll need. But if you would like to know how I got to this point where the train carts have physics-based movement along the tracks, check out that video. And keep in mind I'm redoing the joints here. I'll put a link to that in the description. Okay, so what I have right now is a lineup of train cars spaced exactly how I want them to sit when there is neutral force on the cart. I line them up on the global Z axis to prevent confusion when I'm setting up the joints. When I press play, the movement script that dictates its train-like behaviors will snap it to the spline. So I also have it roughly lined up with the spline to ensure that nothing crazy happens when I try to test it. What I want to do here is essentially create a chain starting from the engine, with each cart linking to the one behind. This means each cart, including the engine, will have one joint that connects to the cart behind it, excluding the final cart, since there is no cart behind it. I'm not going for hyper-realism, but I do want it to moderately resemble a real train coupler. So based on that, I have two pretty basic requirements. First, I want the carts to have the freedom to rotate 20 degrees in either direction parallel to the track. Second, I want there to be a small but noticeable dead space between each cart, such that if the force on a cart suddenly reverses direction, there is a brief moment before that force reaches the cart after it, more closely simulating how a real train would look. Based on what I've seen with Unity joints, configurable joints are the way to make this happen. Okay, since I have my lineup ready to go, I'll start off by adding a configurable joint to the engine. Immediately there are a ton of options in the inspector, which may be a little intimidating, but all of the defaults allow pretty standard joint movement, so we can actually ignore most of these settings. I'll do a thorough breakdown of everything needed to meet the requirements I just laid out, but I won't spend much time on the stuff we don't need. The first thing we want to do is attach the cart directly behind this into the connected body field. This is the sole rigid body that the joint will be attached to and represents the link between the two carts. Next, we'll have to configure the anchor, and to do that, I'll want to turn my isometric camera on to get a perfect side view. This is where lining them up on a global axis helps with getting the camera view just right. The anchor essentially represents the center of the joint, and conceptually, I want this to be the point of coupling between the two trains. To achieve this, I move it about halfway between the engine and the attached cart, which in this case is about 3 units behind the center of the engine. The anchor units are relative to the origin of the game object this joint is attached to. The connected anchor, on the other hand, is the conceptual anchor point of the cart being attached to this joint, with the values being relative to the origin of that connected object. This is, by default, automatically configured, but I've had some difficulties setting this up before, so I tend to do this manually, in which case you have to uncheck the auto configure checkbox. If you leave the defaults for everything else, the connected anchor gizmo point in the scene will snap to where the anchor gizmo is when you press play. So I'll place this point on top of the anchor point. The axis and secondary axis is a bit of an odd way of representing the local axis of the joint. The defaults are lined up with the local axis of the game object the joint is attached to, and dictates how the linear and angular motion occurs. We don't need any fancy rotations or anything, so I will leave these as the defaults. Speaking of motion, that is the next thing we need to set up. All of these motion fields have 3 options: free, limited, or locked. These options are exactly as they sound. If it's free, it can move along or around that axis freely. If it's limited, it moves based on constraints you give it further down the inspector. And if it's locked, it has no motion on that axis. Since I didn't change the default axis values, axis is referring to the local axis of the parent game object, in this case the train engine. Going back to our original requirements, we want 2 degrees of motion, linear movement on the z-axis, and angular movement around the y-axis. However, we don't want total freedom, so we will set these to limited, and everything else will be locked. If your spline might have an incline, you might also want angular motion around the x-axis, but I won't be needing that here. With that set up, the last thing we need to do is set the limits for linear and angular motion. For linear motion, this is under the linear limit dropdown. we need to change the limit value to something reasonable for our scene. This unit of measure is just the same as the unit of space in the scene. So if I set this to 1, it will have half of that amount of linear freedom on either side of the anchor, which would be 0.5 units. This sounds like a good amount for my scene, so I'm going to leave it at 1. We will leave bounciness and contact distance at 0. Next, we need to set the limits for the angular y limit. It has the same fields as the linear limit fields, but the unit of measure for limit is degrees. Any given turn on my spline shouldn't be more than about 20 degrees, so I'm going to give it 20 degrees on either side, which means we need 40 degrees in total. And that should be all we need to do to configure this joint. I'll test this out quickly to make sure things are working properly. You can play around with the limits to make it feel the way you want, but we basically have what we need here. Okay, so now that that's working, all we need to do is duplicate this joint along all the carts so that they're connected properly. I can do that by copying the joint and pasting its values on all carts except for the last one, and then just changing the connected body and anchor values to make sure it's all lined up properly. Once that's done, we have some decently realistic train motion along the spline. If you have any feedback, or if you just enjoyed the video, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.